At least we might get going. You happy? You're controlling the numbers there?
Let's get started.
Terrific. Right. First of all, welcome everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name's Ross Wyatt, but you can see that because it's written on the screen. I have the privilege of being a board member for SIMNA Limited and have been for some time, and really enjoy being part of a thriving community of practice of many thousands of practitioners. Before we formally start today, I would like to do something very important, which is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today, recognising there are many, many communities represented. I would like to also recognise that sovereignty on those lands was never ceded, and pay my respects to all elders and communities past, present and emerging. Just to say a couple of words about SIMNA itself. Thank you for those that are new to joining a SIMNA event. For those that have joined in the past, you're probably well aware that SIMNA is a thriving community of practice of many thousands now of social impact practitioners. And as I have tried to explain to my parents and others what I do for a living, I must admit I never went through university thinking I would ever end up being a social impact practitioner. But here you go, we invent these jobs because they're important. I would like to recognise that these kind of conversations and the sharing of knowledge that Rebecca is going to undertake with us today is a really important part of that, being a community of practice. So I will introduce Rebecca more fully shortly. But for now, I'd like to throw over to my colleague who is on my right at the moment, Lisa McGee, who'll take us through what to expect for today, and then I will introduce Rebecca Duell and we'll get underway.
Thank you, Ross. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa McGee and I am SIMNA's lead doer and connector. You see my name on many of those emails that land in your inbox. It's nice to see you here. Hi. Some housekeeping. Ross has touched on this. You should all be on mute. Please remain on mute during this session. Also, we are recording this webinar today. So many more people will want to watch it, I know. So if you want to watch it back, we'll be sharing this on SIMNA's YouTube channel in the next day or two. On the team today is Aidan Date. I'm delighted to have you back, Aidan. Aidan is a freelance consultant in the arts and social impact space, but also a member of SIMNA's WA committee. Now, the starting point for today's webinar was the SIMNA Awards, which you may be familiar with. SIMNA has been running the awards for 5 years now, and the awards in essence are there to celebrate excellence in social impact measurement. We know there's some great work being done out there, and the SIMNA Awards really help to shine a light on the leaders in this field. So needless to say, we are delighted to have one of those leaders with us today. A big hello to you, Rebecca.
Hello.
So Rebecca, just to introduce Rebecca more fully, Rebecca, as you may have read in the correspondence, is the Impact and Innovation Lead at the YMCA of Brisbane. Rebecca also has more than 20 years experience of working with young people. She's a sociologist with a PhD from Griffith University, and she's also the current holder of the SIMNA Excellence in Social Impact Measurement Award. And it was a shame at the awards I didn't get to actually present her with the trophy, so I've actually got it here. So Rebecca, I'm going to just pass that on to you now, and you've got that trophy. There it is.
Oh, well, the magic of Zoom. I have the trophy.
So congratulations, Rebecca, for winning that trophy. And we're really excited to have you here to share your insights into best practice in social impact measurement, the best practice that won you that award. So we're going to have this in 2 sessions. So Rebecca, over to you for the first session.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'd just like to start off by saying thanks very much for inviting me along. Yes, I don't consider myself an expert or a leader at all, but I'm more than happy to sort of share what we've been doing at the YMCA here in Brisbane, and hopefully people might find it interesting and maybe learn something. So I'm going to share my screen now. Do let me know if there is a problem with what you see. It should be fine. Okay, just go from here. This is also going to work. Cool. Okay. Let's just have a look. Ah, yeah, perfect. Okay, that's working. Okay. All right. So, yeah, look, thanks for having me. I'd also like to start off by a quick acknowledgement of country, because I think it's really important, particularly in these times at the moment. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm actually standing today, here in Brisbane, which is the Yagara and the Turrbal peoples. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also pay my respects to those young people who are emerging as leaders as well in the community. And we work with a lot of those at the YMCA, so I think it's important to recognise them. Okay, so I think for me, as an impact measurement practitioner person, often we are asking ourselves the question, you know, are we making an impact with the programs and activities or the policies that we might be trying to understand or evaluate? And I guess for me, sometimes what keeps me up at night is the question, more of that reflective question around, you know, am I making an impact in my organisation and, you know, in my practice and with work? So I guess what I really wanted to focus on today was just imparting 4 lessons or 4 tips or 4 things that I've actually learned in the last 3 or 4 years of particularly working at the Y around what's worked for us in terms of good impact measurement practice. So the 4 tips, I'm going to run through them one at a time, but the 4 tips are, the first one is to have a clear impact measurement process. And I believe that the process or the methodology that, that we have was what helped us win our award. I think the reason it's important to have a really clear approach or a process is that it helps you engage with program teams. And that's actually a lot of hard work in that area, I find, particularly when your focus with your impact measurement work is around using that data to inform decision making or inform continuous improvement within your organisation. So yeah, working really hard to engage program teams so they actually see the value in impact measurement and the value in the data that you might be collecting and how they can use it in their work. And then the third tip is that it's really important to involve stakeholders in that process as well. So stakeholders being our program staff, but also obviously our program participants or beneficiaries or clients, you know, however you refer to them in your service. Yeah, and I think involving stakeholders is really important. I'll talk about why. And a really good way that you can involve stakeholders is by using a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data to tell their stories. And I think qualitative data in particular is something that I'm probably have the most expertise in, although I'm very much learning about statistics and SPSS and all sorts of other things in the last 6 months in particular. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use qualitative data to tell stories at the YMCA. So, right, have a clear impact measurement process. So when I started working at the YMCA, like most people, this was 3 years ago, and we were doing we were doing a little bit of data collection and we were thinking about impact measurement, but it was quite ad hoc. And I think that's where most people do naturally start within their organisations. Yeah, and I must say actually a little bit of background about my work is I work as an internal evaluator. And it's my job primarily to evaluate or measure the impact of our different programs that we run under the umbrella of YMCA Social Impact. And so those programs include community housing, they include a big vocational school that we have for young people who have been disengaged from mainstream education. We've got about 450 students across 5 locations. We also run a big schools breakfast program in about 115 schools. We do community vocational education and training. So we do quite a broad range of programs, and it's my role to work internally with program staff to measure those programs. programs. So I guess that gives you a little bit of context about what I do. So the process, why is it important to have a process? So when I started, we were relatively ad hoc, but I felt like we were very ready to sort of go to the next level and formalize what we were doing and why we were doing it, and being a lot clearer around what our process for doing that was. And so I spent a little bit of time reading about, you know, what's best practice here? You know, what would be some really important elements or things that we really need to do from beginning to end to say, hey, this is how we actually do impact measurement, and this is why we do impact measurement at the YMCA. Yeah, so the process is, it's flexible enough to meet the needs of different programs, but it provides, I think, clarity in terms of having people understand what impact measurement is and what it's going to actually look like for them in their program. So yeah, it's important to have a clear process because it helps to demystify the data, or what data means, or what impact measurement means and what it looks like. And of course, you know, if once you've got a good sort of rigorous process or methodology that you're going to be following, hopefully it's evidence informed, and it's going to bring a little bit of rigor and accountability to your practice. So yeah, so the reason we do impact measurement, like I said, is really, and it's really for internal purposes of continuous improvement. The secondary purpose for us at the YMCA of Brisbane is to meet obligations with funders or to communicate our impact to external stakeholders. So that's really where we're coming from, and the process that we have put together, which has got 4 steps, it really makes explicit that part of the reason of what we do is to actually learn. Okay, so it's an organisational learning approach, really. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual nuts and bolts of how we do it, but I'm happy to answer questions later. But yeah, so we have 4 stages. It's informed by best practice, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel, or we don't want to claim that we're doing something amazingly innovative. So there's a lot of information out there which you can access to tell you about, you know, what are some really important things that you need to be doing in your impact measurement. So yeah, so the first part of the process is that we scope the program because we want to learn as much as possible about that program and its intended impact from the people involved. So we spend time talking to program staff, and we also spend time talking to the participants of the program as well, plus doing that more traditional sort of desktop research into other programs and, you know, how have other programs measured their impact, and, you know, what outcomes should we be expecting to see. So then we get into design once we do that, and the design phase of the evaluation plan or the impact measurement framework, again, it involves a lot of contact with stakeholders. We run workshops with our program staff to work out the program logic or the theory of change. And it's sort of like an iterative backwards and forth, working out, okay, what's the program trying to achieve? What are the outcomes? And what are some ways we can collect information to understand whether or not it's meeting those outcomes? And any other sort of key evaluation questions that we want to understand. The third phase is pilot. So we just start small and we don't try and roll out the whole data collection plan, for example, to every site, or, you know, every single participant suddenly has to do a survey. So we pilot what we're doing. And then towards the end, the sort of end of the process is around implementation of the framework and learning. So I think, you know, at the end, what we end up with is a written document which states how we're going to actually use the data to inform decision making. So that process can take 6 months to a year, depending on the size of the program, or it could take, you know, 2 months. But what we get at the end is a really clear idea about what data we're collecting, who's responsible for collecting it, and then how we're actually going to then use that data to inform our decision making. And so I guess a good example of that is lately at our vocational school, we use a survey 3 times a year to collect wellbeing outcome data. And we use validated psychometric scales for that. So one of the measures that we use will flag to us if any of our young people have low or languishing well-being. And what happens is once the data comes in, within a couple of weeks of us getting that data from the students, then we collate a list of the students at each campus, and then that list of students is then fed back to the campus pastoral teams, which will include the senior youth worker and also the counsellor or psychologist on site. And then they then make contact with those young people to follow up. So we use the data, we collect the data for a broader purpose across all our young people to understand if there's change in those outcomes over time. But we have also, you know, an explicit protocol to say, okay, we're collecting this data, but we need to make sure we're honouring the data and we're flagging young people who are low in wellbeing, and then sending that information back to the program teams to action. So I think there's certain things like that that are all sort of worked out in this process phase of developing the impact measurement plan. So moving on to my second tip. Okay, work hard to engage program teams. Now, this little cartoon, I actually saw this, someone else was giving a webinar a couple of months ago, and I thought, oh, that's just perfectly illustrates sometimes as working as an internal evaluator, what you're trying to achieve in terms of helping people use data so they can improve their program or gain more insight in terms of what's working and what's not working, or where they might be more effectively spending resources. But a lot of the time you get a bit of pushback because people are like, oh, I'm just too busy, Rebecca, now to do a survey. Or, you know, I love the sound of those qualitative interviews that you want to do, or you want to get some placement students to do, but can we do that next term, or can we do that in the next quarter? And, you know, how much work is this going to be for me? So I think working really hard to engage program teams is maybe something, you know, something that I was surprised at how much attention that I need to give those relationships. Yeah, so the process helps me engage with program teams. And I'll just move on to, yeah, so, sorry, lost my train of thought. So anyway, getting back to that. So a lot of different people have a different understanding around what impact measurement is. And some people embrace it, and other people are concerned about what it means for them, or other people will just do what you ask when you ask it. But what you're really trying to do as an impact measurement professional is communicate to them how important it is to use that data. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so I guess a really good
Rebecca,
example.
we'll take a pause in just a couple of minutes and take some questions as well. So feel free to just move on for another few minutes, and then we'll do questions.
Okay, I'll let me give you an example, because I think that's easier for me to illustrate. So we use the survey and to collect these outcomes data from our students. Now, we've been collecting that data for about 3 or 4 years, and so it's been a bit of a journey, and we've had a variety of different responses from different program staff around the data, and some resistance in terms of, you know, can we use a survey to, say, measure an outcome like improvement in a young person's sense of purpose. And so it's been a real learning journey for us in terms of listening to staff, listening to what their concerns are with that survey, and then helping them to use the data. And I guess one of the things that we've learnt is that where we haven't done a good job is that we haven't actually really communicated the results of the survey back to staff in a way that they can engage with. And so what you're looking at now is we actually produced a little video a couple of weeks ago, myself and our learning coordinator, and it was to show the program teams at a staff meeting, because we've just gone into our June data collection period. And so it was a really kind of comical video where we're having a data party, and we're talking about A, what the purpose of the survey is, B, we're talking about a new wellbeing measure that we have introduced this year and what it's actually measuring, and C, we're then talking about you know, getting their response rates up for their particular campus, and doing a bit of a shout out as well to some campuses in the past who have done a really good job. So it's just a 10-minute video. As you can see, we were just having a bit of fun with it. I enrolled Manny to help me because she's a really influential person across the school. She's a very effervescent person and people really relate to her. So yeah, it was just an excellent way of trying to say to people, hey, we hear you when you say, what is this survey for? And this is one way that we can actually communicate back. And it's on video because of COVID, obviously. So yeah. I'm sorry that went off on a bit of a ramble, and I'm more than happy to take some questions.
Cool. Well, I'll jump in. We've had quite a few, and thank you to everyone who has shot something through. I think we've had some pretty good coverage of the stakeholder engagement element of it. So hopefully those of you who asked around that are satisfied. I guess to start us off, and this comes from Tanya, can you share any examples of key evaluation questions, and or how do you know that you're asking the right questions in your evaluation?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I guess with key evaluation questions, we don't want to just be looking at what is the impact and has the impact that we're hoping to achieve been achieved, or what have been the outcomes. What we really want to know are things like, have all the outcomes that have been achieved, have they been felt equally across the program participants? I think that's something that's really important. Asking yourself that question, you know, what's worked well, in what context, and why has it actually worked that way? It really depends on the purpose of your impact measurement or your evaluation. So if you're more inclined to understand like an implementation journey, so then your evaluation questions are going to be different. You know, has the program been implemented in the way that it was intended? What were some of the barriers to the implementation? What's worked well in the implementation, and has that happened across all sites? Say if you're looking at doing evaluation across multiple sites. So I think your evaluation questions are really going to be determined by the purpose of your evaluation.
Fabulous. Next one, and Kat, I might rephrase this a little bit, so feel free to smack me in the chat if I totally ruin the point of it. But just wondering, you obviously have some great program-specific evaluation. Is that collated or transformed into like whole of organisation measurement metrics? Like, yeah, could you tell us sort of what measurement looks like on an organisational level?
Absolutely. So the short answer to that is no, we haven't gone that far in our journey. At the moment, we're just looking program by program. Different organisations will take a different approach, and so it's quite interesting that my colleague Rick from WA here is here as well. So I know that at the Y in WA, they have gone more, let's look across the organisation and try and get that impact story across the organisation, and then drill down a bit deeper with their program by program evaluation. Whereas we've gone the other way around, where we go program by program by program, and we're not quite ready then to collate that information up in terms of our impact organisationally. And then, because the YMCA is, every state-based YMCA is independent to each other. And then we have the overarching YMCA Australia. And so there is a team of us who work across all the different states, or representatives from different states who work on a board. And one of the things that we've been working on the last 12 months is like a movement, a YMCA movement outcomes hierarchy as well, where hopefully we can bring in our impact measurement and align that across the movement. So yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's something that we're working towards, but we're not ready for it.
Cool. Wow, the questions are really coming through. So apologies, we probably won't get to all of them. Next one is somewhat related. This comes from Chris Lee. So you talked a bit about how you are engaging program staff in the kind of impact reporting process. Do you also include your impact information in your regular monthly management meetings? And how is that data used in that context?
Yes, so it goes to different places, I guess. So we've got obviously our internal board reporting where we report our impact measurement data. We have a process at the end of the evaluation cycle, for lack of a better term, where we run something we call a learning forum, which is like a workshop. So once we've collected the data, say if it's a 6 monthly or annual period, to be able to think about what's the impact, what impact has been of the program for the last 12 months, we put together a workshop, and at that workshop are a variety of different stakeholders. So for example, at our housing workshop, we had our contract manager, we had the manager of the housing, we had the social worker, we even had the 2 caretakers there at this workshop where we actually discuss the results of the evaluation that's reported in a report. But we actually literally rip the report up and everyone gets a page of that report to read through and then talk to with their neighbour. And so, yeah, we're really workshopping like the results of it, because I think if it's just reported in an email and in a report and an attachment to an email monthly, sometimes the impact of that data gets lost. And also I think going back to the point I was making before about working hard to engage with people, that's one of the biggest things I've learned, is that really working with people to understand not only are they receiving the information, but how they can then action that information.
I love it. I love that you were thinking about the impact of impact assessment. I don't think enough of us do that. We're like, we're going to help you assess your impact, but we don't care how our reports are used. We've still got a couple more questions, but I think it'd be great to maybe hand it back to you to continue your presentation. If you've asked a question, we'll try our best to get to it. We'll have a bit more time for questions later on.
Great, okay. So let's move along. So there we go. Okay, so just something I wanted to flag, because when I was putting together my presentation, I was thinking I was drawing on a whole lot of different resources and things that I've actually read over the years. And so just thinking about the purpose of impact and how the purpose of impact measurement and how you can try and build a culture of evaluation in your organisation, which really relies on people who are working in program teams to understand and feel confident about how they can use the data. So one thing, I think I've got this poster on my wall. This is only part of it, but you can get it from bond.org.uk. It's called Building a Culture of Evaluation. And there's lots of little snippets of advice there, things to always keep in mind. And then the idea around thinking about who is the user of your evaluation, or who is the user of your impact measurement work, and how you can actually make your impact measurement work for that person so they can use it. I recommend looking up Utilisation Focused Evaluation by Michael Quinn-Padden. So yeah, so just a couple of tips from me. Okay, so talking about involving stakeholders. So yeah, we have talked about involving stakeholders, but I guess it's a topic that I am particularly passionate about. I think it's really important because the people who the participants on our programs are the experts of their experience with us, right? So I really like this particular photo you're looking at now, because there is a mixture of stakeholders in this particular project that we were running through one of our vocational schools. So up the back, you've got Sophie, who's from the Logan City Council. Then you've got me as the evaluator or the impact measurement professional, you know, and you are in the mix because you're not necessarily sort of some non-biased person that's just observing. Then we've got a couple of our program staff that we're working with the young people. We've got our young people as themselves who were students at our senior campus in Kingston and Logan. And then in the middle, you've got our contractor who was an urban design professional who was working with the students on this particular project, which was activating a space in a market in Logan. So I think it is really important to get people involved so that they can feel like they have a voice in the whole process around what the outcomes are, but also how would they like you to ask them about those outcomes, or how would they like to contribute to the data that you're actually gathering, or what's actually going to work for them. Yeah, and I think you can, by talking to people, you can really, it helps you not waste time on something that's just not going to work. And if you just ask someone first, you would find out. So I think that authentic and meaningful involvement of stakeholders can be quite difficult. And so, not difficult, sorry. It can be a little bit fraught, I guess. And my advice is really to think about what process is going to be most appropriate to the program or the context that you're working in. And so the photo that you're looking at with these young people, we did go through quite a beautiful sort of developmental style evaluation with them, where we produced, or we helped them to take photos of their experience, and then we produced a digital story for them. But sometimes that may not necessarily be appropriate, or you may be constrained by time. So there are other ways that you can you can collect the data, I guess. And so another example I would say about that is that at our housing, when we were looking at what outcomes we should be measuring, or what outcomes we wanted to include in our evaluation framework, it was really important for us to actually talk to our housing tenants. And so what we did is we did a literature review, looking at what are some of the outcomes of social housing. We talked to the program staff, what are some of the outcomes of the housing here particularly. And then we actually door knocked around all the tenants and just had a chat and just said, hey, what's been the impact on you living here? And although it did appear to be just a chat, some of us went into the house and had a cup of tea, other people went out to the garden, but we did have a sort of systematic approach where we were noting down their answers against what we thought would be the outcomes based on the research that we'd done. And then if they didn't say one of the outcomes, which the literature said would be, we said, oh, hey, has actually this had an impact on you? And they would say, oh yeah, that too. Or they might say, no, that hasn't been an impact. And I guess the result of that was that our housing down there is 30% of our population are pensioners, and a good half of our population are on the disability pension, and they won't work again. And so we don't ask them about employment outcomes. Employment outcomes aren't part of our impact measurement framework because that wouldn't be appropriate. Whereas it might be if they were, say, young people. Also moving them on and getting them into a place where they can move into a private rental, that's not where they're at either. And that's not the purpose of our housing, it's to provide long-term accommodation. And so one of our outcomes is actually about aging in place, because that's really important to the people who live there, is that they have a home where they can live. And even though they may say, the only way I'm leaving here is in a coffin, and that sounds really maudlin, it's great because it means that they are comfortable there, and this is the home that they want to stay in. And so helping them do that comfortably is one of the outcomes that we measure. So yeah, cool. Okay, so what you would have probably picked up is that with me talking about involving stakeholders, there is a lot of talk around qualitative data. So we do collect quite a bit of, we do collect quite a bit of quantitative data, and we do a lot of surveying as well. I've got to a point where with some of our programs, I've actually said we will not do any more surveys in this program this year, or we can't introduce another survey for another cohort of people because you can over-survey your population. So I think, yeah, qualitative data can be really powerful in terms of telling people's stories. And so while we're talking about housing, I'm just going to read out this little change story. So this is from a tenant in our housing. It's allowed me to become better in a way. I'm a lot more comfortable in life, and I've got a lot more understanding about how people's lives are and how I am lucky compared to other people. It's just giving me that meaning to keep going, you know what I mean? Back in 2008, 2009, like I couldn't give a damn if I lived or died, because it was just pretty much the way my life was all my life. But being able to sit here and have peace and harmony and be able to live my life. And it's a life of tranquility. It's allowed me to sort of work out who I am. So I think qualitative data can be very, it can be very powerful to tell the stories of participants. And sometimes it's seen as being too hard to collect or too time consuming to collect. Sometimes people might feel like it kind of goes down the path of being more like a testimonial rather than actually giving you the nitty-gritty data. But I think it really does depend on the method that you use and how you do that. So the most significant change method, a lot of people here might be familiar with it because it's used quite widely in evaluation. And so the reason it's really good is because you're asking people to talk about significant change for them. And now change could be negative, it could be positive, like in this case, or there could actually also be no change. But if you are systematically collecting those stories from participants and then reading through them and going through a process of analysis, you can actually, it gives you a better understanding in terms of learning about what's actually happening for people on that program. And it doesn't have to be seen as just a good news story collecting exercise, which I sometimes think qualitative data is seen as. And so I've got another example from that. This is a different story that I collected at that same time from a different tenant. He says, there are positive things about living on your own. You know, you can come and go as you please. I don't mind having a bit of a bash in the kitchen, so I can cook whatever I like and watch what I like on TV with no one to nag me. And I really don't think I would ever have another partner as such. I've not been very lucky with partners. So I guess independence is probably a pinnacle, but there's still that loneliness element because, you know, you can't discuss what's going on in the world. So so I think, qualitative data can be powerful and it doesn't necessarily need to be seen as something that you just use for marketing purposes. Of course, it has a secondary purpose in that way if you do collect good stories, but it can also, be really powerful. And that particular story around loneliness and living in social housing, that's borne out by the research in social housing as well. And that has given us a really good insight into the lives of our tenants to say, okay, what can we do at our housing to create a bit more social connection for people? We actually thought we were doing a really good job around this with some of the activities that we run, but hey, what else can we be doing for people? All right, so I think I'm probably getting to the end. The digital story that we made with young people, I won't go into this because that could be a topic for a whole presentation in itself, the process we went through to make the digital story. But I guess the point of showing you this is that you can get really fun and creative with your qualitative data collection. And if you've got the time and the space and you've got someone to be a custodian of the actual process, then you can produce some really powerful stories that come straight from the mouths of participants. And so with our digital story, it's actually the young people who are narrating their story when you watch the video. So yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much it from me. So just to recap, have a clear process because it will help you articulate what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it will help you really to engage those program teams who are all important in the impact measurement process because a lot of the time they're collecting the data and a lot of the time the data is for them to be using. And involve stakeholders. And a great way you can do that is to use a mix of qualitative and quantitative data to tell stories. So thank you very much. And for
the next 15 minutes or so, Aidan will have more questions and wrangle more questions for you, and then we'll finish up bang on time.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Fabulous. And do keep the questions coming, everyone. No promise that we'll get to all of them, but can't hurt to throw your name in the hat. So first cab off the rank, actually Ross is here. Those were such rich, most significant change stories. Do you have any tips for helping people, particularly young people, to self-reflect so that they can articulate that change, share that change with you?
Yeah, definitely. So with the digital story that we produced, and you can use this for most significant change as well with young people, is we took the young people took photos of their experience. It was a 5-week project actually. So they took photos of their experience and then we printed out those photos, as you would have seen, and they chose the photos. First, we did some dot voting around, okay, which photos do you think are the most significant in terms of, the story that we're trying to tell or what was happening for you at the time. And so they went round and they voted on their favourite photos. And then after we did that, we went back through them and said, okay, hey, Dylan, you chose this photo here. Can you tell me about what's happening in it? And, what's happening, who are you with, how are you feeling, why did you choose it? And so I think sometimes with young people, yeah, they will definitely struggle if you're doing like a one-on-one interview to say, what was significant about that experience? They might be shy, they may not, they may struggle with that level of reflexivity in that moment to talk about it. But if you can bring things like photos, another thing I've used in the past with young people is Lego. So Lego is just universally popular, right? And so you can get people to sort of fiddle with Lego while you're talking to them. Then you can ask them to build a model, to say, hey, can you, look, here's all this Lego we've got. Can you like build a little model? I'll give you 2 minutes to show how you're feeling in that moment or what your experience has been doing that particular course or whatever it is. And yeah, people just naturally start to put bricks together, and it's not so much, with young people or adults, it's not so much what they actually create, but it's about the process that they're quickly going through to put together that model, and then they have to talk about that model and why they built it. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of different techniques you can use with young people where you're using like different props really to help them. Play-Doh is another good one. Yeah. Externalizing with young people is another good one. So another thing we've done before is got young people to make a Play-Doh figurine. Particularly if you're working with young people who have experienced trauma or have anxiety and things like that. So you ask the young people to make a Play-Doh figurine of themselves, but then put that on the table and say, what's the figurine feeling? Or if the figurine, or if that's you and that's your experience of doing X thing, tell me, how is that figurine, or how is that you as a Play-Doh person feeling in that moment, or, thinking. So yeah, there's different things I think you can use with young people, but you got to get creative and have fun.
Amazing, creative and have fun. Great note to finish that one on. Next up, sort of a similar one. Any advice on assuring cultural appropriateness of engagement, particularly around working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders?
Yeah, so I think, again, this is where you really need to understand your relationship as a practitioner and also as a service provider, in terms of what you're asking of people and what you're asking them to share as well. I think that and then it's finding the most appropriate way to actually collect the data or the information that you would like to collect. I think 2 things. One, if you can, when we're working with culturally diverse young people, what we want to do is have them actually build capacity from the process, right? So we don't want them to come away from the process feeling like we've just extracted information out of them, or that they are, like the subject in a research project or something like that. And so I think a lot of the time, actually spending a lot of time talking about, why we want to use the data, what the data is for, and how it can help them is really important. Yeah, and then going, okay, if these are the types of things that we'd like to know from you, how do you feel about that? And how would you like us to actually ask you those questions as well? And, tell us if there's anything that you're not willing to share. But I think you have to understand your relationship of power and that dynamic, and do the work as a practitioner to inform yourself around what are some culturally appropriate ways of working with that particular group of people.
Great, fantastic. That's really helpful. Next question is from Siobhan, and I love this. This is a great geeky question. The question is, do you record all the information in a central database, or is it a bit more of a patchwork quilt of repositories, which is my favorite phrase from all the questions. And then there's a little question in there as well around if you're doing any sort of client journey mapping stuff. sort of that might be moving between programs and services? So it's a meaty one.
Yeah. Okay, so client journey mapping, we're not. I don't know a lot about that, but I've seen it, I've read about it, and I'd certainly like to do it. But the nature of some of our programs, I've yet to sort of see how we can apply it in a really meaningful way. The patchwork quilt is such a good way to say that I wish we had a much better system of keeping track of all our data, basically. Yeah, we're just on, at the moment, I mean, this is to give you an idea, we're at the moment putting in a business case to get a customer relationship management tool or a client management tool. So we don't even have one of those across the organisation at the moment, across YMCA of Brisbane, social impact. So yeah, so it's very patchwork quilt. There's a lot of Excel spreadsheets. There's a lot of very well labelled files. I'm learning how to use Power BI for doing some of our reporting, and I can highly recommend it if you if you know how to sort of use an Excel spreadsheet and can create a pivot table, you can use Power BI to do some really nifty reporting across different spreadsheets, or exporting data out of SurveyMonkey accounts and things like that as well.
Cool. Well, Siobhan, at least you know you're not alone. Definitely that level of stuff, we're all figuring it out. Next question up, I really like this question from Joe. When you get some outcomes coming out of your report that don't align with what funders want out of a program, how do you use your reporting to shift their expectations? And I might, if it's okay, Joe, I might bolt onto that. Let's say when it's either funders or management. Basically, when you're getting good outcomes, but they're not necessarily what you'd expect, how do you use your data to shift expectations?
Yeah, so in terms of funders, we are in a relatively lucky, I guess, place with our programs at the YMCA in Brisbane, where we don't actually have many requirements to report to funders. There's a range of outputs that we have to report, you know, number of young people through programs and things like that. But in terms of our impact measurement and evaluation work, we really do it for ourselves internally. So that kind of goes to the second part of your question there, Aidan, about managers. And so what happens then? So I think, you know, I've learned that there's a way to communicate those results that doesn't disempower people. That's one thing I've really learned quite quickly, is that while you may see, like, say, a poor outcome, just to be in a moment to learn, oh, hey, the young people in this program, actually their wellbeing didn't improve at all. Okay, let's talk about why that might be. Whereas, you know, obviously some people are going to hear that and they're going to be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Or, you know, how do you criticize the program? Or, you don't get what we're trying to do here. And so I think it's around how you communicate it. So we do a little bit of making sure that we say, hey, in the survey, here are some really positive stuff that came out from it, or here are some really positive things that people said. And then, oh, hey, here's some things that didn't work out as well as we hoped. And let's really work through that and unpack it and follow up with managers. Because I think, you know, you can't put what's seen as a poor result in a report, put it in an email and send it to people and think that that's going to be helpful for your relationship with people. So it's really about saying, okay, hey, here are the results. Let's sit down and talk about them. Let's try and contextualize why they might be, you know, and I'm pretty transparent as well around saying, hey, the results suggest this. Do you think we collected the data in the right way as well? So, you know, and sometimes the answer to that is yes, and there just isn't great results. And we really have to go back to our organisation in particular, which has a big focus on learning and something we call growth mindset as well. So I guess we're kind of lucky in terms of social impact. So YMCA social impact is a department within the YMCA where we do most of our charitable programs and deliver most of our charitable programs. So yeah, we've really created a culture of growth mindset, and that has come from senior management down as well. And that's been really, really important. So when people do get those results back that perhaps aren't as good as they would like, then it's seen as an opportunity to learn.
Great. Look, we're pretty close to running out of time, and I want to use my privileged position to ask one question that's on my mind a bit. Like you mentioned, you had a PhD in sociology,
Yes.
and I suspect most of us I did a grad cert in social impact. So, I mean, I came into this world through the front door. Having had that experience working in sort of sociology, what do you think that the sphere of social impact can learn from people that are doing things like sociology around, you know, participatory research and that kind of thing? And then after this one, I'll hand it back over to Ross to wrap up.
That's a good question, actually. So it depends on the discipline. Yes, I'm a sociologist, and if I had to say how has that helped me as an evaluator or an impact measurement professional, it's taught me to keep asking why questions. Why did we get that result? Why is it that some females in this program haven't experienced the outcome, whereas males have? I think there's a real culture of inquiry and wanting to understand, but you can say that, you know, you can say that about a lot of different disciplines. I guess what has my training brought to my work has probably been some of that depth of understanding about research. And, you know, for example, like I can talk, you know, leg off a tin pot about qualitative data if you wanted me to, you know. So, so yeah, I think one of the tips I was going to put in my presentation that I ran out of time with is that at the YMCA of Brisbane, we spend a lot of time engaging with university partners. And I don't mean informal big research or evaluation partnerships, which involve a lot of money. I mean, I get students who want to do a 50-hour placement on a research project or an evaluation project. And so they come to me and I get them to do some data analysis. It doesn't cost me, well, it costs me, you know, a couple of hours of time, and I get 50 hours of research work back from these really keen, enthusiastic university students. And that, I think, is something that perhaps is a really kind of cheap and easy way where you can build relationships with universities, get some insight from different disciplinary partners, whether they're sociologists or psychologists, and then, you know, use those as a part of your knowledge network. So I need to have someone look over our analysis plan for our statistics, our big data analysis that we're doing at the moment. So I've now got a relationship with QUT, School of Psychology, and I've got someone there who will help me. You know, she'll give up an hour of her time because I've had so many of her research students, you know, through our organisation, and she'll look over our data analysis plan to make sure it's, you know, as good as it should be.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Ross to tie this thing off.
Thank you, Aidan, and thank you, everybody. And of course, a special thanks to Rebecca. I just love that. I love that drawing of the, you know, the cave people dragging along the box and don't have time to stop and put wheels on. I feel like the hour that we've just spent together today has really topped up knowledge for all of us. And that's what SIMNA, of course, sets out to do. We're as a diverse learning network. And whether you come as a sociologist or a practitioner or someone with lived experience, it doesn't matter. You've all got something to contribute to diversely learning about social impact. And it doesn't, I often talk about 16th century Abyssinia, don't we all? That was the invention of the financial currency. And of course, in those 400 or 500 years, we've got very sophisticated at measuring the financial performances of organisations. And I feel like sometimes we're still at kindergarten measuring the thing that really matters, and that's the social performance of organisations. So this work we're doing today is continuing to build that. So thank you very much, Rebecca. And just to reflect on what we have learned today, I think your structure around the four elements is so important for us to take away, that having a clear process and moving from, you know, that picture you gave us of moving from an ad hoc measurement across multiple programs to an organised structure that fits into a tapestry of something. I'll get that one down in a minute. And recognising that process also includes the why, the why you measure, and it's if you ever need to remember that Rebecca is from the why, and she's also answering the why do we do this thing. So Then, of course, engaging teams in that why and building a culture of evaluation, how important that is and how challenging it is, and watching the questions, seeing how many of us struggle with making sure that people have got time to stop dragging that box along and put the wheels on, and because it will help things move along. And on that note, of course, involving stakeholders in that process. And I do love the way that, you know, that theme followed when you actually talked about, you know, it actually saves you time and effort to actually engage stakeholders early, because then you're measuring the right things and not spending time measuring the things that don't matter to stakeholders. And when your organisation exists for the purpose of creating change for those stakeholders, who better to assess whether that, assess how to actually understand that change and some of the creative processes that you brought into that. And, you know, I think this idea of, you know, bringing data to life and to take that further, bringing life to data, I think is a really important message to recognise that indicators aren't always financial, aren't always numerical. And I think we often talk now in terms of not indicators, but ways of knowing. What is a way of knowing that this change is occurring? And that often involves a whole lot of mixed methods. So well done for giving us that reminder. So thank you, Rebecca Duell. Thanks also to Aidan Date for doing a great job of wrangling, and thanks to Lisa McGee also for putting this event together. And it's probably one of the biggest ones I've been involved in now, 130 something or other registrations, and out of a community of some 1,500. So it gives you an idea of the interest and level of interest in this session. So thank you to all the members. Of course, it wouldn't be a social impact measurement if we didn't try and understand the impact of what we're doing. So Lisa will have put in your inbox almost right this minute a feedback survey, a short survey. So please give us that feedback so we can keep designing these sessions to meet your needs, the members' needs. That's really, you're the one that is driving the agenda here. So that will really help with that. Of course, the next one will be on 15th of July. See you then. That does answer the tapestry question, because it's about social impact measurement and technology and how the intersection of those two things. So hopefully we can start to use technology to really bring that structure and understanding in the same way that we do with our financial measurement. Wouldn't it be great to have zero for social? And actually have something like that. And I know there's many efforts going on to actually produce something like that. Shameless plug, I saw come up on the chat then. Please, if you're not a registered member, please get on board. It's not very much in terms of what you can learn. So don't be one of those free riders. Contribute to your community and become a member of SIMNA. We really, really appreciate that. And it helps us put on great events. And of course, the next event, or the next great happening, of course, will be the next SIMNA Awards. And I did see that come up, the dates of that they're going live. Lisa, when? And sorry, one of the new bits of language, the most commonly spoken word over the last 3 months is, you're on mute.
Indeed, I was. The answer is mid-July.
Which one? Mid-July. Mid-July, look out for the next award. So if you know someone or your organisation yourself, you're prepared to put yourself up, please, because it's a great chance to recognise great achievement in the most important discipline that we think there is in the world at the moment, and that's measuring social impact. With that, I'm going to end and say thank you very much to everybody for participating. We'll look forward to seeing you on the 15th of July. And thanks again to Rebecca for your wisdom and sharing.
Thanks.
You can unmute and applaud now for Rebecca.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.